All right. We want to thank everyone for coming tonight. Oh my goodness, what a great big crowd. This is so exciting. Thank you all for coming this evening. I'm going to just give a really quick introduction to our guest of honor and then let him take it away because you have come to hear him talk, not me. So let me get started. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel retired Duane Carey grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota. In 1981, he earned a commission as a second lieutenant in the U.S. Air Force and a Bachelor's of Science degree in Aerospace Engineering and Mechanics from the University of Minnesota. He also has a Master's of Science degree in Aerospace Engineering from the University of Minnesota. He was in the Air Force for 22 plus years and logged over 1,000 flight hours each in the A-10 Thunderbolt, the F-16 Fighting Falcon, and the T-38 Talon. He served in the U.S., South Korea, Spain, and Turkey, and during Operation Desert Storm, he earned the Distinguished Flying Cross with Valor Device and 3 Air Medals. He joined NASA's Astronaut Corps in 1996, and in 2002, he piloted the Space Shuttle Columbia on mission STS-109, which was a servicing mission to the Hubble Space Telescope. I'm going to let him cover more of that in his talk. In 2004, Digger left NASA and the Air Force to embark upon a new life. He and his wife Cheryl got to meet both of them. They're just so much fun. We've had a lot of fun, the bits we've been to be able to be together this past week. They're currently engaged in educating young people, that's you guys right here on the floor, and other Americans about the importance of America's exploration and research programs. And they are both inspiring young people to pursue education and careers in math, science, and other technical fields. So keep that in mind when he's talking to you today. Much of their business travel is performed on motorcycles. Digger and Cheryl have been featured in multiple Associated Press articles and in several publications, including American Motorcyclist, Sports Writer, Red Rider, and Road Trip magazines. One of their goals is to ride their motorcycles around the world. I'm excited to hear about that. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a warm welcome for Duane Digger Carey.
Can you all in the back hear this? Can people in the back? Good. I'd like to thank you all for coming tonight. I'd like to thank Kim for getting us here. And Jen Jones, I'm actually crashing her party because she gives Growing Beyond Space lectures here quite regularly. And it was her idea to get us here. Actually, Jen wanted to get Cheryl and I here, and I said, you know, Jen, if we come out just for one thing, it's pretty expensive because you got to eat all our travel costs. And she said, don't worry, we're going to get you a lot of work. So she's got us working 4 nights this week, and we're just having a great time in the area. So thanks. Yeah. Thanks for getting us out here. And once again, thanks to the families and the young families with kids. You know, Miss Cheryl and I raised a few of our own, and we know that there's no more valuable night in the life of a young family than a school night. And when I see this type of turnout on a school night, and you all bring your wonderful kids, I'm just honored to get a chance to share some of my story with you guys. And that was a great introduction, but it leaves out quite a bit. And actually what you guys are going to get is kind of a G-rated version of the real story, but adults, you'll be able to know what was going on, what I'm talking about here. But I'd like to share with you guys my story, and really the whole objective of sharing my story with you guys isn't so that everybody sits back and goes, wow, Digger's awesome. That's not what I'm after, okay? What I'm after is to point out the American system and what opportunities all of us have. But these opportunities are given to no one. They're earned and you work for them, and I think people in this area understand that better than most Americans do. So I'd like to share that story with you, and it's an honor to be, we don't get to work libraries very often, but it's an honor to be doing so. And I will say, and you'll see, there were times in my life that reminded me of the old adage. Times of libraries get us through times of no money, better than times of money get us through times of no libraries. So let's give it up for the wonderful American public library system. And local branches in St. Paul, Minnesota years ago, I wouldn't be standing up here talking to you guys about that. Next slide. You know, Kim covered the details that Cheryl and I go around the world and talk to kids about the importance of education, math and science, stuff like that. Having said that, I find it somewhat ironic that the first tangible effect that I ever had on this world was to cause this bright young lady to drop out of middle school, to drop out of junior high when she was just getting into 9th grade. My mom got pregnant with me when she was 15 years old, and then I came out when she was 16, and you know, my dad was 17, and they didn't have any money back in those days. I slept in a drawer. Next slide. It didn't take long for my dad to lose interest in the whole endeavor, and he ran off, leaving my 21-year-old mother with an 8th grade education with 3 kids and really no signs of visible support. We bounced around a little bit with some family members, and then we ended up in the housing projects in St. Paul, Minnesota. This shot here was taken around 1966 in the McDonough housing projects in St. Paul, Minnesota. That's my little brother and my little sister. Next slide. My mom was working as a beautician, and she had told me years later, she said, as far as her situation, she said, I knew that I'd gotten myself into that situation and I was going to get myself out. She wasn't content to collect welfare checks and stuff like that. In fact, she refused to take that type of government subsidy. She did accept subsidized housing, but she was gone during the day, 12 hours working as a beautician. And so I was kind of a wild child. You know, we were taken care of by babysitters, and I didn't understand what school was all about. Obviously, young kids just blind your eyes and don't even look at this. But during my first 2 years in school, 1st and 2nd grade, I didn't go into kindergarten because back in them days, kindergarten cost money, and that's something we didn't have. But you can see during my first 2 years in school, I was either late for or absent a total of about 60 times. Next slide. While I was going through that phase, you might ask yourself, well, Digger, if you were skipping out of school and you just said you grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota, aren't the winters cold there? Yeah, they're darn cold. And to show you how much I dislike school, I actually chose to hang out in the woods all day in the freezing cold. I chose that over actually going to school where the free school lunches were and the nice warm temperatures. Now, when I was a rising 5th grader, my mom hit the lottery and she married a guy that had a full-time job. That's my dad. Both parents are so young, they're still alive. And my dad was 26 years old, and he was living the bachelor lifestyle he used to drag race cars and stuff like that, and suddenly he marries a young lady who's got 3 kids, 3 rambunctious kids, and he buys a house. So he's kind of stretched a little bit. He's a blue-collar guy. He ran a printing press back in the day. Lithography was his trade. And so, you know, because of all those new bills in his life, he was working 12-hour shifts out at the plant at nights, and I really didn't see him much in those first few years of marriage. Next slide. Now, you might think that, well, Digger, I mean, you guys just got a house and you're out of the projects. Obviously, you're going to start doing better in school. That's not necessarily true. These are my conduct grades when I was in 5th grade. Once again, kids, blind your eyes and don't look at this. You can see that there's some interesting grades here for conduct, especially for someone that ended up wearing a suit like this. I mean, here you've got you've got use of time and materials, straight non-satisfactories across the board. That doesn't sound very astronautish, does it? Or how about another astronaut trait that's pretty important, neat and accurate work, just straight non-satisfactories. I would like to point out up here, under respect for rights and property of others, you know, adults know this, it's always funny what you're proud of as you get older. And I look back and I said, for all the trouble I caused back then, I was never a bully. I got in a lot of fights, but I didn't start any of them. I didn't win a lot of them either. But I wasn't that bully kind of kid, and no kid here ever needs to either be a bully or tolerate bullies. And then Jen always gets happy when I tell her, you know, I had nothing against my schoolmates and everything. I reserved all my venom back in those days for my teacher. Next slide. The downward slide continued in a rather dramatic fashion into middle school. You can see in 8th grade I failed science class, I failed a couple other classes, and then in 9th grade, boy, I was hitting on all cylinders. I failed algebra twice. I failed, didn't do well in science and stuff like that. But it got so bad that I they failed me in 9th grade. I couldn't go to high school. I had to go to summer school instead. And for someone that didn't like school, going to summer school was a horrible way to spend the summer. Next slide. So we're not starting off life in a very favorable fashion. And in defense of my parents, they're great, wonderful people. They were great parents, but they were up to their neck in alligators. My mom had another daughter after she married my dad. And like I say, my dad's working 12 hours, and my mom's doing hair on the side. They moved into a neighborhood they could barely afford. I was kind of getting away with a lot. They were having problems with my brothers and sisters too. But one of the great gifts my dad gave me was a love for motorcycling. He was a motorcycle guy, kind of an action guy, and I fell in love with motorcycles. And when I was in 10th grade, just old enough to get my license, I go, Dad, I'd like to have a motorcycle. And he says, sure. He's drinking a beer. He goes, sure, go ahead. And I go, great. He goes, but you got to pay for it. And I'm not going to pay for insurance or anything, but if you want a motorcycle, go ahead. So when I was in high school, you guys, I was working 40 hours a week at a restaurant so I could get enough money to feed my motorcycling habit. I became passionate about motorcycling. And I tried racing and stuff like that. And so there's at least a couple of moms, all the teachers in the audience, and at least a couple of moms are thinking, hold on a second, Diggers here, you're going to high school and you're working 40 hours a week at a restaurant clearing tables so you can pay for your motorcycles and gas and oil. When did you sleep? Well, I was real logical about the whole thing. I slept through the classes I knew I was never going to use. I slept through those science classes and those math classes. When I was never going to use, I knew I was never going to use that stuff. In my family, with my background and everything, we didn't even know how to spell college, and there was no interest there in terms of ever going to college. I thought in the dim future, perhaps I would learn a trade as my father, as my stepdad had done. Next slide. Now, as you might imagine, dads out there, as you might imagine, I was one of those kids that you had to watch because I wanted to drop out of high school. High school was just getting in the way of my lifestyle. I could work more if I was done with high school and all that. Now my dad's still alive. He's 81 years old and he's had, what, triple bypass surgery in his heart? He can still pound me. He's always been a tough guy. And he told me back in those days, he goes, Duane, you want to drop out of school, don't you? And I go, yeah, Dad, I think I'm going to do it. My dad left home when he was 16, but he was always proud that he graduated from high school. And he said, well, there's two things that's going to happen if you drop out of high school. First thing that's going to happen is I'm going to kick your tail. And the second thing that's going to happen is you're going to be out on the street with what little stuff you have because you're going to be on your own. So I decided it was probably smart to hang around with the free food and housing I had at home. Thank goodness my dad more or less coerced me to get a high school diploma because as we all know, especially the parents and the teachers, that's where it all starts. Nothing happens without that. I knew what I wanted to do. I had 18 years old. I had my life all planned out. I bought a motorcycle. I bought some camping gear. And 6 weeks after graduating from high school, I blasted off to see the world. And here I am up in Canada somewhere, and Mexico, Canada, all over the place. Had some adventures, let's call them adventures during that trip. This is what we don't share when the young kids are around. Let's just say that there were things that involved near starvation and life-threatening type situations, mainly due to stupidity. But I learned an awful lot. I ran out of money. My planning skills weren't all that good when I was 18. I ran out of money. I took the motorcycle back to my mom and dad's garage, and then I went to Southern California. And how did I get there? So there's some skills that you pick up in the projects back in them days. And once again, kids, we don't do this anymore. Hitchhiking and hopping freight trains was two skills I picked up in the projects. And especially with hopping freight trains, there's about 1,000 ways you can get really hurt doing it, and like one safe way, and I knew the one safe way to jump on a moving train with my luggage. And so down to Southern California I went. You know, when you're a kid growing up back in them days in the 70s in Minnesota, Southern California, I mean the Beach Boys and everything, I mean it's the land of milk and honey. So there I went. I believe I hit Southern California with about $40 in my pocket. Next slide. Landed, no surprise, I landed in a minimum wage job doing, can anybody here think of a job that has less future prospects in the 70s than typewriter repair? That's what I did. I'm working on an old A.B. Dick mimeograph machine, doing the min wage thing, had a lousy apartment, no car, no motorcycle, walking everywhere I went, not even a bicycle, eating lousy food, nothing no girlfriends, you know, stuff like that. I thought I'd get a girlfriend when I went to Southern California. That didn't happen. But after about a year of that, I started, I guess you could say I started maturing a little bit. And I went back to Minnesota. Next slide. I went back to Minnesota and took advantage of the example my mother had set all those years ago when she was in a tough spot of going to a technical school and picking up a skill. For her, it was hairdressing. She was a beautician. For me, I had to get off that minimum wage treadmill. Living minimum wage lifestyle back then is no different than it is today. It's a rough way to make a living. Hand to mouth, you're always run out of money before the next paycheck. I went to the Minnesota School of Bartending and picked up a valuable skill. I learned how to tend bar. And what that did, ladies and gentlemen, was it brought me off that bottom rung of life. Suddenly I could afford a car. It was a junker that cost me $100, but I had a car. I could get my motorcycle out of mothballs. I met a young lady. I finally had a girlfriend. And it was while I was tending bar that something very profound happened to me. I was tending bar, and I met a customer who had been a fighter pilot in the Vietnam War back in the 70s. And he's talking to me about flying fighter jets. He flew F-4s. And I'm starting, by this time about 20 or 21 years old, I'm starting to make the connection. Fighters, that's cool. First of all, it's a fun job. Second of all, I think I could do it because I'm a good motorcycle rider. Like I say, I raced them and stuff like that. So I had a rather high opinion of myself. And I know that they paid fighter pilots well enough where you could raise a family and stuff, and that would make Cheryl happy. And then he stopped me and he goes, bartender, he says, you don't understand. In order to be a fighter pilot, you have to have a 4-year college degree. And suddenly, I felt that despair that no young person should ever feel. No young person should ever feel the despair that one gets when one finally decides what they'd like to do with their life and do a cool thing, but they've already allowed doors to the future slammed shut in their face, as I have done. So I will say, I didn't know any better. So I went home that night and I told Cheryl about this, and she says, that sounds really cool. And I said, well, we can't do it because you have to have a college degree to do that. And she looked at me, she says, well, dummy, then go to college. Well, the University of Minnesota was right down the street. Next slide. The University of Minnesota was right down the street, and parents that are getting their kids into college and stuff like that might think this is funny, but it was July, and school started at the University of Minnesota in September, and I rode my motorcycle to campus, and I started knocking on doors in different buildings, and anybody that would give me the time of day, I would say, what do I have to do to go to school here in the fall? I want to start school here in the fall. I didn't know what that meant. Finally, there was a nice secretary in the engineering school of all things, and she gave me some stuff and gave me some practice tests and stuff like that. And so, engineering school, yeah, that sounds cool. Doesn't sound boring. Well, anybody that knows anything about engineering school knows what happened next. I ran into the brick wall of mathematics. Sometimes I refer to mathematics as the great killer of dreams in this country. The sad thing is there's no reason for it. There are zero reasons for it because you don't have to be good at math in order to gain the benefits of math, and we can talk about that later. I didn't know any of that stuff. I was failing out of my calculus classes at the beginning of engineering school. Engineering school is not a place where you can fake it till you make it. It doesn't work. You'll just bust right out of there and end up out on the street. Nobody cares. And I was having a horrible time, and the dream was beginning to fade. And during the 3 weeks that I had for Christmas break after that disastrous first semester of engineering school, you guys know what I did? Had 3 weeks off, and I was tending bar 30 hours a week. And anybody that had a lick of sense that time of year in Minnesota went down to Florida to celebrate Christmas break. I stayed up there in the bad weather, and I went back to my high school. Remember that high school I said I slept through all those classes? And you guys, I checked out a stack of math books starting in 9th grade, all the way up. Geometry, trigonometry, pre-calc, all that kind of stuff. During that 3 weeks, all I did was sleep, eat, tend bar, and study math. And I did every problem in every single book. And you might think, well, Dad, Digger, you went back to engineering school and nailed it. No, I didn't nail it, but you know what? I passed. And in America, It doesn't matter whether you finish at the top of your class or at the bottom of your class. What matters is that you finish. Now you've got that diploma. And that diploma spells opportunity. I didn't understand any of that back then, but I knew I wanted to be a fighter pilot. Next slide. It happened for me, I had the Air Force wanted me to go to pilot training. I was in Air Force ROTC at the University of Minnesota because I wanted to fly jets. And the Air Force gave me a date to start pilot training, but there was about a year in there that was a dead year that I foolishly decided I was going to try to get a master's degree in aerospace engineering and cram 2 years of curriculum into 1 year. And that was a year that just about finished me off. But I got to tell you, when I call math the great killer of dreams in America, it was this book when I was in grad school. Are there any, there's an astronomy teacher out there. Are there any math teachers out there? I got to tell you, for me, it happened overnight. It was an epiphany that I finally understood what the math was about, at least in terms that I could understand. And that morning when I was riding to school on my motorcycle, after that happened, the world was 10 times more beautiful than it had been the day before. And since then, I proselytize math every chance I can get. Next slide. Life got real busy. You can see that Miss Cheryl finally accepted my hand in marriage. You can see I've got a brand new Air Force uniform there. Let me point out the timing of 2 very critical events in my life. One day before the wedding took place, I put on second lieutenant in the United States Air Force. Notice the timing of those 2 events. Miss Cheryl never failed to inform me throughout our courtship that she was never going to be married to a bum. I had to prove myself first. She was a young lady who had a plan and she had expectations. And ever since then, I've been struggling to live up to those, but it's been good for me. Next slide. Guess what? That master's degree I told you about, that I crammed 2 years into 1 year, this is a true story. So with a master's degree, master's science degree, you have to put together a master's thesis. And it's an engineering master's thesis. And I worked hard on that thing. Cheryl and I were living on our own and, you know, paying our rent and bills and stuff like that. So life was pretty hand-to-mouth. But I turned in my master's thesis. I plopped it on my advisor's desk. Midnight, the night before, 6 hours later, Cheryl and I threw our legs over our motorcycles and headed from St. Paul, Minnesota, down to Del Rio, Texas, so I could start flight school. That's how close I cut it. You're going to learn later on the importance of that silly little piece of paper that says master's degree on it. Here I'm learning how to fly T-37s, a primary jet trainer. Do we have any jet pilots in the audience? Okay, if we did, they would be able to share with you how difficult it is to learn how to fly close formation in these jets. It was super hard, but you know what, you guys? I knew when I started flying jets that I had made the right decision. And Cheryl was loving the lifestyle and that feeling of service you get. Next slide. After you're done flying the T-37, back in those days in primary flight training, you go to your secondary trainer, the T-38. You're not going to find any pilots that don't like this airplane. It's still flying. You're not going to find a single pilot that doesn't like it. You know what pilots like about this airplane? If you make a mistake, it lets you know right now. And that's that she's a challenge to fly well. I love flying the T-38 in pilot training. And it was during this time in pilot training when my wife and I, still motorcycle people, we went camping in West Texas one night. It was in the winter time, which isn't that bad down there, and we went camping in Big Bend National Park, which there's an astronomy teacher out there knows that Big Bend National Park was renowned for their dark skies that night. So Cheryl had fallen asleep, and we took the weekend off or something, went camping. It was kind of cold outside, but I'm reading this little science fiction magazine. There's a little candle going in the tent, and I'm reading this little science fiction magazine. And guess what? There's an article in there where they're talking about NASA is considering developing a space telescope. And this was a great idea. I thought they were going to build a telescope that's meant to be in space, and they were going to use the space shuttle, which hadn't flown yet. Actually, it had flown. It was flying for a couple of years, and get a telescope up there. And I remember reading this, and I was struck with a feeling. And I put down the little magazine, and I said to myself, you know, this dream of exploring the solar system and going to space and expanding mankind's presence in the universe, this is a grand endeavor, and I want to be part of that. If I need to sweep floors at NASA, I want to be on that team. And I went outside, I was just wearing my underwear, and I went outside and looked at the stars, and just was like, this is awesome, a space telescope. Then I got cold and I climbed back in the sleeping bag and went to sleep. Next slide. What I wanted to fly on pilot training was the A-10. And we got some folks here that are familiar with the Air Force. The cool thing about the A-10 and why I wanted to fly it, it's got a 30 millimeter Gatling gun, 7 barrels, and these are the rounds it shoots. This is a 50 caliber round. This is a 20 millimeter round that most jets fire, but the A-10 shoots the big boy, and it shoots 70 30 millimeter rounds a second out of that gun. And the job of the A-10 is to help out folks on the ground that are having a bad day. Because if you get a 4 ship of A-10s with some infantry that's on the ground not having a fun time, you can change their outlook real fast with this thing. That's what I wanted to do. I was fortunate enough to be able to fly it. Next slide. Those of you that are in the military know that one of the cool things about the military is you get to try a bunch of different things when you're in the military. And I got a chance to fly F-16s, and that was a great experience. We were stationed in Spain while I was flying those. Next slide. This is during the time frame when a rather unfortunate sequence of events popped up. The first Gulf War in Desert Storm. I flew over 30 combat missions in Desert Storm, and you know, we can talk about that if you'd like. The only 2 things I can tell you about combat is I would do it again if I had to, because that was my job, but there's nothing good about it. I don't care what you see on movies or anything, there's nothing good about combat. Next slide. Remember that master's degree I told you guys I almost knocked myself out trying to get there in that hard year? That master's degree, that silly little piece of paper, allowed me to have an opportunity to go to United States Air Force Test Pilot School. And for someone that liked to fly like I did, Test Pilot School was great, because during that 1 year of Test Pilot School, you guys, I got to fly over 35 different kinds of airplanes, and we went all over the world and flew everybody's airplanes. This here is a Swedish interceptor, the Draken, and we went to Sweden, a Swedish Air Force base, to fly this thing. But I got to tell you, this is a great hero shot. But as soon as I jumped in the cockpit and tried to get the engine started, I broke the jet and never got to fly it. But I think it's a great shot, so I keep it in my talk. Next slide. This here, some of the folks in the audience may be familiar with the custom of the Air Force Finney flight. Finney flight means it's your finished flight, that you're done flying at that particular base. Here I'm flying at Edwards Air Force Base. My job was to test F-16s. Incredible job. Some of it really scary, most of it really cool. And I'm all drenched with water there because that was my last flight at Edwards, and my friends came out and sprayed me down with the fire hose. That's the tradition. Next slide. Why was that my last flight to F-16s? It's because I was going to get a chance to get back in a T-38, that airplane that I flew in and loved all those years ago. But more importantly, next slide. More importantly, was because of these silly little pieces of paper I had and this little diploma from United States Air Force Test Pilot School, NASA called me up and gave me the opportunity to fly the Space Shuttle, which in those days was considered to be the apex of the aviation pyramid. One cool thing about the Space Shuttle, you guys, it's a strange thing that was happening. I started to realize that something very unique was about to happen. And let me tell you, remember that night I shared with you guys in Big Bend National Park in that tent when I was going through T-38 training, learning about that space telescope? 19 years, almost to the day after that night, you guys, I woke up in a sleeping bag, again, NASA-issued sleeping bag, and I turned my head to the left, and there it was. Next slide. The Hubble Space Telescope was in the payload bay of my spaceship. Now, is that crazy or what? But only in America. Only in America. But it happened because there was a lot of hard work. Nobody said, hey there, you know, it'd be cool to fly space shuttles and stuff like that. You have to show them what you can do. But you can do that if you work hard and never give up. Next slide. So what I'd like to share with you guys is a neat movie we made about mission STS-109 to the Hubble Space Telescope. Let me just tell you real quick what you're going to see. A shuttle mission to the Hubble Space Telescope is actually quite simple. The first thing you do is you blast off from Earth, and you go to space, and you find the telescope. Telescope happens to be about 350 miles high, and it's going around the world at about 18,000 miles an hour. You get close to it, you grab the telescope with the robot arm that's in the cargo bay of the space shuttle, and you pull the telescope into the back of your payload bay. And then you embark upon 5 straight days of spacewalks where our spacewalking astronauts, the mechanics, go out and they take old equipment out of the Hubble and they put new equipment in. The Hubble had been in space for 10 years, and astronomers know that advanced electronics are really getting better at a rapid pace. So the instruments that were in the Hubble were becoming obsolete already, but we were going to go up and put brand new stuff in there and make it better than it was. Then there's a little issue of letting the telescope back out into space, and then we fly away from it, and then we land this thing. So pretty simple. You blast off, you look for it, you find it, you grab it, you fix it, you let it go, and then you come home, hopefully. Next slide. There's our mission patch. Kids in the audience, you know, astronauts have to be artists too, because we design our own patch. So kids that have artistic skills, you're welcome on the space team. We took off at night. That was our vehicle there. Scott Altman, the world's largest astronaut and our commander. You guys know who he is. Spacewalker John Brunsfeld. Our flight engineer, Nancy Carey, the world's smallest astronaut. We had both on our flight. Rick Linehan, spacewalker. Jim Newman, spacewalker. And Mike Massimino, the other rookie on the mission, and the guy that ate most of my food when I was in space. Put on these launch and entry suits. It doesn't look like it, but it's about 2 o'clock in the morning. Then you get into your spaceship. Now, getting in there was a team effort. We had folks down at the Cape to help us get strapped in. I'd like you folks to try to imagine what it would be like getting in your car or truck if it was standing on its back bumper. And that's what it was like getting inside the space shuttle. And you're wearing all this cumbersome survival gear up here on top of it. I'm sitting right up in the front, right there, the pilot's position. There's our commander, Scott Altman, the world's largest astronaut. Those solid rocket boosters, you guys, are made right here in Utah, as most of you know. And we still use that system on the Space Launch System that NASA's going to use to put people on the moon. A lot of good jobs there, kiddos, and some of you folks may do that work too with Lockheed Martin. It was a night launch. We went through the clouds. Cheryl tells me it was beautiful. I was a little busy at the time. 2 minutes after liftoff, these solid rocket boosters came off, and they splashed down in the Atlantic Ocean to be reused. They brought them back to Utah to be stuffed full of rocket fuel again. We got so high that we saw the sun for about 15 minutes before the people on the ground did. And then you guys, 8.5 minutes after liftoff, you're out of rocket fuel, and anything that's not tied down starts to float around inside the cockpit. There's our external tank that carried our liquid fuel. We get rid of that, and it's going so fast it lofts all the way over Africa and then splashes down in the Pacific Ocean. This is a cartoon depiction of the rendezvous maneuver between the spaceship and the telescope. You guys can see the size of the telescope, 25,000 pounds, about the size of a small school bus. NASA folks do everything as part of a team, as military folks do also. We worked together as a team with Mission Control. On the 3rd day, we found the telescope. Rick spotted it with the laser device. And then Scott Altman, this is kind of cool. Scott Altman, the world's largest astronaut, Nancy Carey, the world's smallest astronaut, then joined forces to fly the spaceship up next to the telescope so that Nancy could grapple it with the robot arm. Why was Nancy on our mission? She was on our mission because she was the world's finest robot arm operator. You can see the grapple fixture of the robot arm, or the end of the robot arm approaching the grapple fixture on the telescope. You guys, we were so high of altitude and we had used up so much of our fuel that Nancy really only had one chance to perform this maneuver, but she had trained really hard for a whole year to prepare for this basically 5-minute event. And that's kind of how space is. There's little things that can happen that can mess up the whole mission, and you gotta get ready so that you can't fail. One of the things we were going to do was replace these solar panels outside the telescope. The old ones were flimsy like foil, and the ground commanded those to roll up and prepare in preparation for the first 2 of our 5 spacewalks. John and Rick are getting ready to go out the door on spacewalk number 1. And I think Rick was a rookie spacewalker on this one. And the rookie spacewalkers always tell you what an experience it is when they come out of the airlock for the first time. And there's our planet Earth all just laid out in her grandiose beauty. This is a shot taken from the helmet cam of one of the spacewalking suits. And that's an astronaut holding this old solar panel up against the side to prepare for removal. I'd like you guys to notice that this astronaut here is attached to the end of the robot arm. Nancy's flying the arm, Scooter and I are flying the shuttle, and we're working with mission control. There's a team of literally thousands of people working together to make this happen. And you guys, when you're working in space and you're taking equipment off of telescopes and stuff like that, you don't throw anything in the trash, you don't let anything float away. That could be very dangerous. So we took all the old parts home with us. This is one of the new solar panels. Now the new ones were different than the old ones. The old ones were flimsy like foil, but the new ones were stiff like the covers of a book. And you can see the constrained astronaut on the end of the arm. The other astronaut is what we call the free floater, and he goes around and uses tethers to keep him from floating off into outer space. But this next shot is one of my favorites, getting the solar panel in position, orthogonally in position for installation with the telescope. But ladies and gentlemen, this solar panel here weighs 600 pounds, and you can see Rick handling it just with his fingertips. And this is some of the magic that people can do when they're in space. You can do things that are impossible here on Earth. Always working together as a team. The checklist items were read from inside the cockpit because these guys on the outside doing the work don't have room, nor do they have time to refer to the checklists. They probably got them memorized at this point. Check out the beauty of the Earth. If there's any flat earthers here, feel free to come up and talk to me after. Once again, solar panels stiff like the covers of a book, plugging them into the side, working together as a team. I can't stress the team thing enough. And one thing, ladies and gentlemen, I see in schools all over the world, Cheryl and I have been doing this for 20 years. Our kids are much better teammates than we were because they learn it from the beginning and they practice it a lot. And these are life skills these days, these teamwork skills. A lot of new things to learn. I was responsible for recording all of the footage from these cameras that were in the spacewalkers' helmets and various cameras. Back in those days, all we had was 40-minute long digital videotapes. So all spacewalk would last 6 or 7 hours, and I'm swapping out tapes constantly during these. We're all working together as a team. So great gyro assembly going into the side of the telescope. All of these maneuvers and spacewalks had to be practiced laboriously on Earth before we went into space. And they practice them, the spacewalkers practice them in a gigantic underwater swimming pool we refer to as the Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory. These spacewalk practices underwater are extremely difficult. These suits are not kind to your bodies. Spacewalk number 3 started out in a disastrous fashion. See the water leaking out of there? That was John's spacesuit, and we caught that leak in the airlock. We caught that leak in the airlock. If it would have been 5 minutes later and John would have been out in the vacuum of space, it's kind of sad to think he wouldn't have lasted more than a couple minutes with a leak like that. So we took his spacesuit apart and we built a new spacesuit for him, and we kicked him out the door because his job to replace this, the power control unit. People that like electronics, notice those 36 barrel connectors. Those had been connected in the vacuum of space for over 10 years. We were afraid that several of them were going to be cold welded shut. That pair of pliers you see the astronaut using to remove and to replace those barrel connectors, those were not designed by anybody who has a college degree. In fact, most of the work done in our space business, including nowadays, is done by folks like my dad and like my mom and like I was before I went to college. Folks that graduated from high school and then picked up a technical skill. Okay? Not every kid needs to, we don't want every kid to go to college, because if they did, who would do the work? There's lots of work to be done in the space program, and we need kids that are sharp coming out of our K through 12 that go to technical schools and learn those skills that it takes to build these spaceships and build these satellites. Spacewalk number 4 was a rather tense affair. We were taking a camera out of the telescope. That didn't look like a camera to me, that looked more like a phone booth. But this is a camera that we took out. It had been in the telescope for 10 years. It was obsolete. You guys, we're putting a new camera in there that was going to make the Hubble 10 times more awesome than it was before we got there. The advanced camera for surveys right here, built by people with technical degrees, not college degrees, in Boulder, Colorado. There's not too many places, nicer places to live than Boulder, Colorado. Ball Aerospace, Cheryl and I have worked up there several times. The advanced camera for surveys. This piece of gear here, you guys, weighs 600 pounds, and the new camera, get this, the new camera cost $250 million back in 2002. Who would like to be the one responsible for breaking that camera and watching that money come out of your paycheck every week? Astronauts are taking out some tools that they have to use. Like I say, all these spacewalks are choreographed, practiced, time and time again before we actually fly in space. You can see Scott Altman flying the robot arm. That was another thing he was trained to do. And this is actually spacewalk number 5, where the astronauts are going to install a telescope, a radiator on the outside of the telescope. Astronomy teacher knows why this is. There's 2 astronomy teachers here. But you guys, the Hubble takes really good images of the stars using infrared radiation. And infrared detectors have to be cooled to very low temperatures. And that's why they're installing a radiator on the outside of the telescope so they can cool that down. And this is an example of what the American spacesuits look like. I'm a little bit embarrassed to report that we are still using the same spacewalking suits. We are in dire need of new spacewalking suits. It's not going to be long, kiddos, that we're going to have human beings walking on the moon. And not much after that, we're going to have human beings walking on Mars, and our current spacesuits are not up to the task. Who's going to build those spacesuits? It's going to be you guys. And you're going to work hard in those math classes in particular, and don't let the dream almost die like what happened to Digger. And we need you badly. We need the best spacesuits to do this kind of stuff. There's John preparing to install the radiator. This weighs 400 pounds, and he's twirling it like a baton. Astronauts all work as teams all the time. You got 2 astronauts helping install this on the outside of the telescope. And finally in place. This was our 5th spacewalk, and we were getting real tired. We were anxious for this one to end. The new radiator used gaseous neon as a cooling fluid. So they're connecting up the cooling lines for the radiator, connecting the different cooling lines and electrical connectors that have to go together. I think astronauts have to deal with cables and wires and stuff a lot. Yeah, they do. Kids, if you guys are good at setting up mom and dad's, home movie system and stuff like that, we need you on the space team. And another thing I'd like to point out to kids, when astronauts are done with their toys, they bring them all back inside. They don't leave anything laying around, just like you guys should always clean up when you're done. This is what our telescope looked like when we were done. There's the robot arms stowed off to the side. This was a chance for Mike, the other rookie on the mission, to practice some of his arm skills. So Nancy was showing him what she knew, and Mike grabbed the telescope with the robot arm, pulled it out of the back of the payload bay, and then he very gently and expertly let it go in space. You'll see the arm pulling away from the side of the telescope here shortly. Now, one of the jobs we had when we were in space, one of the myriad jobs we had, was to take close-up photographs of the entire exterior skin of the Hubble Space Telescope. That represented valuable data. That told us about the micrometeor environment in low Earth orbit, 300 miles to 350 miles up. So when the telescope was floating away, this particular choreographed event gave the crew the only chance in the whole mission to actually document the condition of the bottom of the telescope, because we'd never had a chance to see that before. But kids that like to plan, and kids that like to choreograph and put together complex tasks, we need planners on the space team. This was all planned out before we flew in space, and we almost memorized our flight plan. We just followed the plan. Rick's telling us that the telescope is 400 feet away, receding and getting smaller. The folks on the ground then opened up the aperture door and gave us the good news. After 5 days of laborious and invasive spacewalks, they said, "Congratulations, you guys, you did not break the telescope." Nobody likes a dirty, smelly astronaut. We got cleaned up a little bit before it was time to come back to Earth. We're all real tired, but we're looking forward to coming home. We did a little bit of exercise. This is an exercise bicycle machine that NASA used to fly. I don't know if they're still using them. Sometimes people ask me what my biggest surprise of spaceflight was, and it was how good exercise felt. In fact, I'm convinced that if exercise felt as good here on Earth as it does in space, we'd all be Olympic athletes. There's Mike eating more of my food. You know, Mike was actually one of only 2 astronauts in the history of manned flights, Soviet and Russian included, that actually gained weight during a space mission. We like to show you Earthlings how beautiful your planet is, so we take videos and we take pictures, and I know you know how beautiful your Earth is, and I know your sunsets and sunrises are beautiful in this part of the world. But in space, you get to see 16 of these a day because you're going around and around. Now watch Nancy. Nancy just went blasting backwards, you guys, because we had just fired out retro rockets to slow down enough to enter the Earth's atmosphere. You put on your launch and entry suits for the perilous journey back to Earth, and see those flashes out the overhead window of the orbiter? Those are lightning bolts. And they're shooting out the tail of the orbiter out into space. We are generating so much electricity and so much heat. The temperatures underneath our spaceship are approaching those of the surface of the sun. It's a form of matter known as plasma. Nobody ever told me about those flashes, and I was a little freaked out. Landed at 3 o'clock in the morning. It was dark out in Florida. Cheryl dragged our teenage kids out of bed to come see this. They didn't want to go. And one thing people don't realize is the space shuttle, when she was coming back to Earth, it was a glider. In fact, we had been a glider since Australia. And we glided all the way across the Pacific, all the way across the United States, and touched down to Florida. You might just imagine how many times Commander Altman and I practiced this landing before in the shuttle training aircraft before game day, thousands of times. You can't afford to make a mistake. You can't go around and take another try. It has to be perfect. And sometimes when you fly in space, sometimes that's just what you have to do. You have to be perfect. Now, I'm Air Force. Commander Altman was Navy. This is the first time he ever landed the space shuttle. I was the one responsible for making this movie. He only had one request. He goes, "Digger, I want you to show the public my landing several times." He's a Navy guy, so what can I say? We were slowing down. That's our ground speed up there, you guys. I remember thinking, this is crazy, because 40 minutes ago we were going 18,000 miles an hour, and now we're almost stopped. Kiddos, when you guys are done with a report or something like that, a test, you want to see the teacher smiling. Astronauts want to see the dudes with suits smiling. Those are the bosses, okay? World's smallest astronaut, world's largest astronaut. Nancy always said, "Why did I have to be standing next to Scooter for this one?" Let me tell you, we were extremely fatigued. I was tired. I'm more tired than I was in combat. But we were proud. We had done the job that we said we were going to do. Some folks told us it wasn't possible, that humans couldn't do that much work, and we proved them wrong. Next slide, please. We're going to go back. Next slide. Oh, so you guys can see during that mission, you can see there's an awful lot that can go wrong during a space shuttle mission, right? We have the blast off, we have the on-orbit operation, we have the little issue of coming safely back to space. But ladies and gentlemen, if you fly one of these missions and you go out there and everything works and you didn't get into trouble, next slide. There's cake. Next slide. Now, I'm entering the advanced camera for surveys, and I'm going to open up for questions as soon as I can, because that's my time. I'd love to do that. I'd like to point out, I told you about that advanced camera for surveys. Real quick, the astronomers in here already know what I'm fixing to say. You're done with dinner tonight, you got a breadcrumb, you guys. You go out into these beautiful clear skies and you hold a breadcrumb at arm's length. And then you pull it away and you imagine that tiny piece of sky that was obscured by that breadcrumb. Now if you're the Hubble Space Telescope, you aim at that piece of sky, but it's a piece of sky, a tiny, tiny piece of sky, and there's nothing there. You can't see anything. The Hubble Space Telescope with the advanced camera for survey spends 25 days on a long duration photograph. 400 orbits, around and around it goes, 4 months of observation time. And ladies and gentlemen, this is what she showed us in that tiny little piece of space where we can't see anything. There's 10,000 galaxies there. And if you do a little bit of simple math, that means that in that tiny little nondescript piece of sky, there are 30,000 stars for every man, woman, and child on planet Earth. Now you ask yourselves, where are we headed in the future? Okay, we are going out. We need your kids really, really bad. Don't fret. There's a lot of good space jobs right here in Utah. Your kids don't have to leave. They don't even have to go to space. The majority of the space team is going to stay right here on Earth, which is what people prefer. Most people don't want to be astronauts, and I don't blame them. Next slide. I left NASA at the end of '04. My wife and I looked at each other and said, what are we going to do when we grow up? We raise kids, we're both passionate about education. We go all over the world and we share the story with kids. Because these are the members of the space team. These are the ones that are going to take us to Mars and to the moon around Jupiter. This is some work we did in the north of Scotland. Next slide. This is one of my favorites. This was, Cheryl, I can never remember if this was South Carolina or Georgia. We used to do a lot of travel on the motorcycle before our lives got busier. But see that little guy on the light post up there? I love that picture. You know why? That little guy's an independent thinker. And he's going to come up with ideas that nobody else does because he thinks different. And moms and dads, if you have a child or two that just seems to be a little bit off in left field, we need them on the space team because, you know what? We're not doing real good right now. We need a lot of fresh ideas. Next slide. One of our passions is to reach kids all over the world. I harbor a secret belief that there's a handful of kids out there that are going to be the ones that drag us kicking and screaming into the future, but they need inspiration and they need leadership. And I dream of the day that Cheryl and I will present in a sub-Saharan African village and see a kid out there sitting in the dirt, and she's the one that can do it. Those kids are out there, you guys, and it's up to us to inspire them and to give them opportunities. Next chance. I dream of a future. I dream of a future when a young man like this, right here in America, is given the opportunity to go out there and fly F-35s or F-22s or whatever they're flying in the future. Because you know what, you guys? Last time I checked, this is still America, and the same opportunities are still out there that Cheryl and I were afforded, 2 working class kids. This is within our grasp, but no one's going to give it to us. Thank you very much.
Kim will have a mic, I'll have a mic, we'll try to, since there's so many people, we'll try to get on each side of the room. If you have a question, raise your hand and we'll try to get to as many as we can tonight. Go ahead.
How heavy was the spaceship?
How heavy was the spaceship? That's a great
How
question.
heavy was the space suit?
Sometimes kids ask me, and Jen knows the answer to these guys, how many pounds of fuel were in the external tank?
Duane,
I don't know.
space suit.
The space suit. Oh, the space suit. This is a real problem. Our spacesuits, our spacewalking suits weigh about 200 pounds. So they're really hard to walk around with on Earth. That's why we practice underwater, so they can kind of float underwater. You guys, and I love NASA, okay? NASA gave me an opportunity. Kid that grew up in the projects and jump trains. NASA gave me opportunities. But I got to tell you guys, the first spacesuit that NASA designed for our moonwalkers weighed like 350 pounds. And that's just not going to make it. That's not going to do it. We need original thinkers. We need spacesuits. Questions?
Have you ever been to the moon before?
Have I ever been to the moon before? Well, let me just tell you real quick. My spaceship was pretty awesome. It had a lot of power. We're not flying my spaceship anymore because it got too old. But imagine if this dad over here was the moon, and imagine if this computer over here was the Earth. You know how far my spaceship could get away from the Earth? Only about this far. It couldn't even get halfway to the moon because it doesn't carry enough gas. So who's going to build the spaceships that can go to really, really far places? You guys are good, or the spaceships. You guys are good, and that's why we're here.
Okay.
Questions?
What's it like taking off?
What's it like taking off?
Mm-hmm.
It's something I didn't share with the audience because there's so many kids here. It's some serious trouble I got into involving law enforcement and stuff like that. And there's this feeling of being alive you get when you've just dodged a trip to jail or stuff like that. That first sortie in combat, when the Iraqis are shooting SA-3s at you and you manage to escape that, and your wingman got lost and he's headed to Syria and you're headed, and you gotta go get him all by yourself and you survive that. Those make you feel really, really alive. After that 8.5 minutes of blast off with all that fire and all that power, when the engines cut off and we were safely in space, I felt that same sense of euphoria, which told me I had been scared witless. But kids, it's okay to be afraid of stuff, but you gotta be able to do your job while you're scared, okay? And so I guess I'd have to say it was scary, but the power is incredible. What a machine that was.
How long did the mission take?
How long did the mission take? We were in space for 11 days. And during those 11 days, I know that you probably like to get at least 8 hours of sleep each night. During those 11 days, we were so busy, we were getting about 4 hours of sleep each night. I talked to a young security forces troop out there, and he's, Digger, you guys got 4 hours? That's 2 hours more than we ever get. But we were getting more and more tired, and it was really a challenging 11 days, and by the time we landed it, we probably weren't safe to land it, but we had trained so hard that we were able to do it. I've never been so tired in my life as I was toward the tail end of that mission.
Okay.
How hard was it while you were training?
How hard was it while I was training? The training was fun because that's what I wanted to do. I was given opportunities to do things that I was interested in that I wanted to do. Because I worked hard and I put myself in a position to be offered those opportunities. So the training was hard and I didn't resent that at all. But there is something that NASA does, and I have to say it with respect to all the military people out there, there's something NASA does even better than the military. Do they know how to train you for a difficult job? You know how astronauts train? They study, but they don't understand it the first time. So they study it again. You think astronauts are really smart? Well, some of them are, I guess. And you study even more until finally you learn it. And you would think, and this is what my training was like, you would think that after you learned it that it was going to be easy, then comes the practice. And NASA used to make us practice so much, I thought it was ridiculous, until I got into space the very first day and experienced what astronauts refer to as space stupidity. When you first get to space, your brain is so overwhelmed with all the new experiences, your IQ drops to about 50% of what it was before. So mine dropped to about 30. And I'm trying to figure out these easy problems, but I was able to do them because of the repetitious training that NASA gave us, and then I understood. But I enjoyed the training. I loved it.
You said you that you wanted to fly A-10s. Did you ever actually train in one?
Did I do what?
Training in A-10.
Training in them? Yeah, I got assigned to fly the A-10, and we spent about 5 months at Davis Monthan learning how to fly it.
Yeah, I think you have about...
And I went out to Louisiana, and I was an A-10 pilot. And there's one thing every A-10 pilot will tell you. First time you shoot the gun, you go, yeah, that's everything they said it was going to be. Next question.
How heavy was the spaceship?
How heavy was the spaceship? My spaceship, when I landed, was around 220,000 pounds, which I guess this thing's about the size of more or less about the size of a 737 airliner. However, those wings don't produce a lot of lift. And you have to land at very high speeds. When wings don't produce a lot of lift, that means you got to keep your speed high in order to have enough lift to keep from crashing into the runway. So 220,000 pounds, wings that don't work very well, that meant we had to land around 230 miles an hour to land this thing. So, good question.
Okay, Kim.
I have a few questions.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did
Do you have any ion engines on the space shuttle?
Did he say ion engines?
Yes.
No, we don't have ion engines up there. That's a great question. Ion engines Jen can answer this question much better than me. But ion engines are useful for situations where you have a lot of time. You need thrust, but it doesn't have to be a lot of thrust. But ion engines can fire for the longest times and they don't use much fuel. They're very efficient. Whereas in the space shuttle days, and anything with people, any spaceship with people in there, you don't have enough time to take a long time to get out to orbits and stuff you want to get to. So we tend to have higher thrust engines on our spaceships, and they're not as efficient, but they get you faster to where you're going. Because when you're in a spaceship, you're using your air and you're using your water, and the time that stuff takes is very important. But ion engines are very important for satellites and things like that. Good question.
All right, down here, let's see.
What is it like to float in space?
What is it like to float in space? You guys know, kids in the front here, I'm going to call you guys diggers, kids. Kids in the front here, you guys know exactly what it feels like to float in space. You just don't realize it. Have you guys ever been on an old-fashioned type roller coaster? The kind that goes clack, 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 and goes up to the top? And it's what happens next? The big drop. And how does that make your tummy feel? Feels really strange. When you're floating, your tummy feels like that 24/7. And you know what? Here's something NASA doesn't like me to share, but about half of all astronauts actually throw up after they get to space. And here's another thing. If you're the kind of kid that says, I get car sick and I get sick on rides, chances are you'll probably do just fine in space, but if you're the kind of kid like I was, I never get sick in jets and cars or nothing like that, you're probably going to get sick. It's a different form of sickness that we call space adaptation sickness. We're going to need doctors and nurses on the space team to help us with that, because it's not very much fun getting sick on a spaceship.
I don't have any questions. Has there ever been any emergencies?
Any emergencies? There was an emergency on my mission. Right after we had gotten to space, this thing had the computers in it like for those of you that know about computers, they were like early 1980s era computers. And so software loads, when you got to orbit, you had to get rid of, and they were magnetic tape. You had to get rid of the software load for ascent, and then you had to load the software load for orbit. And that took a period of time. Well, when we loaded the software load for orbit, we found out that my spaceship had a serious problem. It had a problem that would allow us to get too hot. And we thought we were going to come back to Earth right away, which would have been terrible. But there were specialists on the ground, people on the space team that never have to leave Earth, that were experts on my spaceship. And they stayed up for 36 hours and they figured out that it was safe for us to stay in space. So that was the emergency that we had. But we were helped out by the people on the ground. We were helped out by the space team. Questions? There's a mom coming. Never get in the way of a mom.
Which one is the black hole? Are there any black holes?
Black hole.
Is that your question?
I always get the black hole question for kids. Actually, what I might be looking at here is a future physicist. Do you like black holes? Yeah, we don't know much about them. Now, have I ever seen one? No, you guys saw I stayed pretty close to Earth. But the Hubble Space Telescope has actually produced enough evidence so that we have a pretty good idea that in the center of our galaxy there's a gigantic black hole. And actually, if it wasn't for that black hole in the center of our galaxy, we might not even be here. So black holes are very important, but we don't know much about them. You guys are the ones that are going to teach us more about the black holes.
Okay, I think we're going to go for about another 15 minutes if the parents can handle that. And then afterward, if anyone can stay longer, we'll be here to answer more questions. Or Jen said she'd come on another night to answer any other questions.
And while we have you still here, think of some really good questions because we've got time. I'm going to have Jen Jones. She's our NASA Solar and System Ambassador. She's got an announcement for some of you that are in 6th through 12th grade for a really cool opportunity with NASA. So I'm going to give her just a couple minutes to do that while you think of some really good questions, and then we'll continue, okay?
Hi everybody, I am Jen Jones. I'm a Solar System Ambassador. I work with NASA. I'm also a Space Foundation teacher liaison as well. So I work with the Space Foundation. And Digger and his wife Cheryl do a lot of work with the Space Foundation as well. So I wanted to let you know that we have programs here at the library very regularly. I'm here all of the time. And if you would like to come back on another day when you can see some of those programs, you are welcome to do so. Also, another opportunity that you can ask Digger some questions is going to be tomorrow night. It is from 5 to 7 p.m. at a school called Quest Academy Charter School in West Haven. Now, we didn't get it approved with the library to be able to give you flyers about that, so I'm sorry about that. But if you look up Quest Academy Charter School in West Haven, you can come between 5 and 7 p.m. and you'll have lots of opportunities to ask Digger questions. Now, another little thing I wanted to tell you about is something that's happening right here at this library. It's very fun. We have over here that purple glowy thing is for a program called Growing Beyond Earth. Now, this program is for 6th grade age and older. It does not matter if you're in a public school, if you are private schooled or charter schooled or homeschooled, you're welcome to apply. The library has applications that are available right now that you can do that. You can go on the library's website and there's a link there that you can sign up to apply to be a part of that program. Now, the really cool thing about that program is that you are doing real NASA research. So on the International Space Station, there is a veggie unit that is very, very much like this little box over there. Matter of fact, this little box was designed to be a replacement for the veggie unit. And in that veggie unit on the ISS, they are growing plants in it as we speak. But NASA does not have enough botanists to be able to check every kind of plant there is out there to see which ones are going to grow best in space. So they do a program called Growing Beyond Earth, where children, just like you, get a chance to grow those plants in a veggie unit simulator, which is what that is, and you report that data back to NASA. NASA uses that data to test those plants further, and then they decide what gets to go to space based on the data that you collected. So in the future, when you hear, so in there right now we've got some fennel growing, and we had some basil in there, but we actually had to harvest it for NASA told us the day we had to harvest it on, so it has been harvested. But when you see in the future that basil or fennel was grown on the International Space Station, you will know that the kids that were in this program at this library this year helped NASA to determine that those plants were good ones to send to space. So I'd like you to invite you to apply for that program. There is a limited number of spaces available. And like I said, you must be 6th grade age or older to apply. It's not my rule, it's NASA's. Yeah, it's the specific age. It's not my rule, it's NASA's rule. I'm sorry, I wish I could take younger kids, but they won't let me. So I would like to invite you to do that. And then please also watch the calendar for the library, because there are tons of space programs here. This is kind of Space Central for Davis County. We have programs for little ones, after-school programs that they do that include their STEM programs, but they include a lot of space. And then, like I said, I'm here all of the time doing space programs. So, without further ado, I'm going to turn it back over to Digger to answer a few more questions, but please remember that there are other options to be able to get your questions answered. And if you do need to leave, we understand we're already over time, but we really appreciate everyone coming, and we really appreciate those of you who would, if you would like to stay and ask more questions. Thank you so much, everyone.
Okay, here we go.
Thank you, Jen. Jen, now that you've been brave enough to step forward, can I refer the hard questions over to you?
I love answering hard space questions, I do.
What was it like flying planes?
What was it like flying planes? It was every bit as much fun as I thought it was going to be, except When I got older, it wasn't so much the fun, but it was knowing that I was doing a job for my friends and my countrymen. That was a difficult job, but it was fun. Now, you talk to Cheryl, who's a nurse, and she looks back on those days and she says, that beat up your body pretty good. You're looking at 50% VA disability, primarily spinal, from flying the F-16 and the A-10 with all the G's we had to pull. Would I do that again? I'd do it in a heartbeat. I no longer have the body to do it.
Okay.
Future Mars astronaut here, you can brag about me, so you met me.
I love it.
And I was wondering, were you ever scared when you were doing takeoff, like when the 1986 shuttle crash happened? Were you ever scared that something like that might happen to you?
Oh, what was the last one?
Oh, okay. She's a future Mars astronaut.
There you go.
Yes.
You need a lot of help for that. I mean, from your
I'm
friends on
assuming
space.
for her brother. I'm not sure. Anyway, and then, okay.
And actually, let me comment on the Mars thing. Yeah. If you are interested in being a Mars astronaut, I was actually very lucky to be selected to go on a simulated mission to Mars back in December. This Mars is actually in Utah, believe it or not. We have a Mars here, but we have a NASA base there that is very similar to what they expect a base to be on Mars when astronauts first get there. So, Kim, we gotta schedule another Mars day coming up soon. We'll do that. We'll have a Mars program coming up. You can come and ask me all kinds of questions about Mars.
Okay. The last part of it is, were you ever scared, and especially maybe the shuttle crashing, because she's talking about Challenger?
Yeah, that's always a concern. But you know, astronauts, there's a lot of risk, but you sign up for that. I mean, you realize that. And any astronaut that's not feels some fear during the ascent, I don't want to fly with them in space because they're not normal people, okay? Who wouldn't be afraid of stuff like that? But we train and we learn everything we can about our mission. Most of your training as a Mars astronaut is going to be what to do when things go wrong. What to do when things go right is actually pretty easy, but you got to learn what to do when things go wrong, and that'll take up a lot of your training. So I will say that throughout my Air Force career and then as an astronaut, a lot of military folks here understand this. The thing you're most afraid of is being faced with a new challenge and not being able to beat that challenge. You know, and flying to space combat was like that. I'd never been in combat. Your first combat mission, you don't know whether you've got it or not. Some folks didn't. Your first mission in space, you don't know if you're going to do well or not. All you can do is just train, and get up there and give yourself a shot. And I think that's probably what most of us are afraid of. We're afraid of that we won't be able to do it. So that inspires us to train even harder.
Okay, we've got our final question, and then we are going to end our program tonight. Totally.
Do you actually do any recovery time when you get back to Earth? Because you're in space and there's no gravity, and then you come back to gravity. Do you have to be retrained to be on Earth again?
Yeah, the question had to do with, so, you know, you go to space and then you adapt to the floating around and stuff like that. Well, what about when you come back to Earth? Does your body have a hard time with that? And Cheryl, being a highly trained nurse of 40 years, could probably answer that.
Well,
do you have a microphone?
No, I have a normal voice. Yes, they do have to kind of be retrained. He wasn't allowed to drive. He wasn't allowed to ride his bicycle. He was not allowed to ride his motorcycle. And that was 3 to 4 weeks, which we, between our son, our daughter, and myself, we hid keys and locked up the bicycle because he wanted to get on them so bad. I think the other thing is when you were at work, you could tell them about how you had to walk slowly.
Yeah, when I was a new astronaut and I hadn't flown in space yet, I could always tell who had just gotten back from space from the other astronauts, and they got these long hallways, and I'd be walking down the hallway and I'd be following somebody and go, I wonder who that is. And then she comes to the corner, and most people, you know, you go around a corner just like this, you're all happy and stuff. If it had been an astronaut that had recently landed from a space mission, this is what she did. She's all happy getting up there. She gets to the corner and she goes, and then marches away. Your sense of balance comes from your ears, obviously, and that gets messed up pretty bad when you're in space. For various reasons, your ears still think they know what they're doing when you're in space, but then your brain has to learn to shut off those signals, otherwise you're going to be sick all the time. Your stomach gets into the act. So your brain learns to do that, and then you land and your ears are going, hey, this is more of what I'm used to, and they're probably working just great, but your brain's not listening. And you have to retrain yourself. Now, I was up there for 11 days, but there's folks, we got a friend that was up there for a year. And you know what Cheryl is?
Ocular issues, he had bone density issues.
Didn't he also say that the soles of his feet are like really, really sore when he started walking around because you lose all your calluses?
Yeah, exactly.
And you just float around. You don't even wear shoes up there unless you're spacewalking. You run around in your socks. You float around in your socks. So yeah, there's tons of stuff. And we need specialists to help astronauts readapt. That's what we need these kids, medical personnel.
All right, we want to thank Digger for being here. Let's give him a big round of applause. And for Cheryl, please welcome her tonight.
If anyone wants to possibly get their child or whoever and take a picture with him, that's fine. We'll stay. We just know that it's getting close to bedtime,
You're
right?
probably have a big test tomorrow in school, right? Miss Jones knows a whole bunch about space, so you can ask her questions too.
He asked me, sorry. Hey, Digger. Hey, Digger. You need to tell everybody real quickly why your nickname is Digger.
My nickname, that's a fighter pilot call sign. And there's two things about call signs in general. First of all, nobody can invent their own call sign. It will be given to you. And the second one is nobody likes their call sign when they get it. So let me just leave it at that, sorry.
These astronauts is don't be careful.
Coco and Hannah?
No.
Do you remember?
I thought they looked really different.
Yeah.
Are they clear?
No.
No.
No, they look a lot alike. Hey, how's it going? I thought I saw like the baby girl.
Here that whole time.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah.
We stayed about 10 seconds and we did a scavenger hunt and we took out 100 books. Did a good job.
Whoa, that is so cool.
One is 400 pages. We watched the blood sector.
Oh,
It's scary. People excited about it.
ooh, good. Yeah, okay, great. At least I'm standing here hoping to do that. That's our intention.